I did the one on 21st Century Media. That was an okay one. The interview I did with Jeffrey Waddles was interesting because he loved it. He put on his website how wonderful he felt. He said, "Dan, I love this man." I was going to do a show on religion and how to improve one's life with Jeffrey Waddles and Bruce Ariel from the Uptown Poetry Group. Bruce couldn't get couldn't get Skype working, uh, and so
One thing about Jeffrey Wallace, he seems like a very nice person,
yeah.
but if you go to his site, a lot of what he promotes is anti-model to what you are about, where he's talking to all these philosophers who are full of crap, right in Maya Angelou and all sorts of obscenely bad stuff.
And
He's a little bit new agey too.
yeah, he had something. I forget what it was. I remember beforehand. He said he didn't want to talk about. Apparently, he had promoted 8 or 10 years ago. He was involved in some new agey kind of Christian thing that he fell out with the guy about it. Online there's something about it, and he didn't want me to talk about it. I said, yeah, I don't give a shit. So I didn't bring that up. The Western film one, I had three guys. I ended up with one who was a good, solid interview. TV's golden age is one of my favorite. It's one of the best shows
It's
out
very
there,
fun too.
and no academics. Three bloggers, three people who really loved and enjoyed television. And the thing that I loved the most is all three of them disagreed with me at the beginning of the show that the 1960 to 1980 20-year period was the real golden age. At the end of the show, all three admitted I was right. I made my point. So,
well, statistically, if you find all these great shows, like there's what you can maybe ascribe a dozen great sitcoms in history. Most of them are in the 70s and a little in the 60s. I guess the Honeymooners also qualifies as a great sitcom. There's nothing really in the 80s, nothing in the 90s. I mean, you could go to these cartoons like The Simpsons and Family Guy, but they've tanked. And they've been so bad for so long that they can't. That there's no way you could rank them in there with like All in the Family or The Odd Couple or Mary
no.
Tyler Moore. Then there's the great dramas, The Twilight Zone, The Prisoner. PBS was at its best. And there is a lot of passion for it. You even get into things like soap operas and the decline and fall of soap operas. So it's a very comprehensive look of all of TV.
And the woman Amanda Reyes is going to appear on another show. And the other two guys, when I do some other TV shows, I'm going to ask if they want to do it. They all love the show and want to come back and contribute in the future. Amanda Reyes is going to appear on a show I'm going to do in a month or two about TV game shows. So she was terrific. I really liked her. Then I did the Godzilla show, which was a good one. This guy, Ryan Harvey, I think is the kid's name. He then came back for a later show. We talked a bit about the James Cagney one. The race show was with one of the guys who
This was better than the first race show because Nicholas Wade, well, he had some problems in the first one.
Yeah.
He is terrific in talking about race here.
Yeah, and that was good. Then the Vincent Price two shows. Initially, I wanted to have the daughter Victoria Price with two or three experts. It ended up just doing back-to-back shows on a day with just one expert and then Victoria Price. So that was an interesting little thing. Kind of that's sort of like what I'm doing. It's sort of what happened with the poetry translation.
Victoria was a little too mannered and artificial in how she went about it. I'm sure she loves her dad and everything, but she really didn't talk about what made him, if not a great actor, then what gave him such presence.
But I think she was better than Anne Serling was talking about her father.
Yes, that's true.
Then and so that show became two shows for the same reason that I had the poetry translators and then Harold Wright at a second show. And it's the same thing that happened with the Wallace Stevens stuff. Is I'm having a Wallace Stevens 2 or 3 man panel, but there's one guy who's a linguist he was camera shy and wanted to just do a show alone. So I'm doing that. The 68 in Cinema show had this Donato Totaro, who later came back to do the Tarkovsky show, and he was very good. He had a bad.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it's told.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. In 1968, I would agree it's one of the most seminal years. and you point out many of the great films. But I'm wondering about like a more obscure year. That 1939 is always talked about as a golden year. I don't think it really is. I can't even think of a great film that came out of 1939. Maybe an arguably great one, but great, no. With 1962, though, I can think of all the films that came out that year. That would be, for me, in the history of cinema, probably the best year. It had so many great films, even some second tier films. I don't think there's anything as seminally transformative as 2001, but there are so many great films released that year. Lawrence of Arabia, Harakiri. There's even that Mr. Magoo cartoon. There's a few other great Japanese directors that contributed. The Trial by Orson Welles, which is probably the best Orson Welles film up until the end. There's I could think of some second tier one, but what do you think about that? 1962 would be a little more difficult to get because 68 has been promoted so much.
Well, you can argue in terms of qualitatively, but 68 I did also. It's not just a show about 1968 in film, but about 1968. That politically, especially in the U.S. and also with the Prague Spring and Vietnam, and the death of Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, that that had a catalyzing effect, and the films were very political. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to do that one.